everybody. Welcome to episode number 8 of the Clarity Project podcast. I am your host, 𝗦𝗢𝗖𝗓𝗦. So, this podcast is a little bit different because if you're watching this podcast instead of just listening to it, as you can see, I am now standing, which is a little bit different because from the previous podcast, I was sitting down. So, aside from that, today we're going to be talking about and we're going to continue from the things that we left off from the previous episode. If this is the first podcast that you are watching, just know that the things that I do here in the podcast is that I reflect back onto my notes, and this is my notebook. In this notebook, I'm going to read some of my notes here, and then after I read them, I'm going to reflect on them. So let's get started. So for this one, I sure hope that there's like this note where I got this from, where I got this idea from, but there's no indication or note where I got this from. But it does say that it is from October 14, 2022, and it is from 5 p.m. I wrote it down at 5 p.m. And yeah, I'm just going to read it to you guys. It is true. We depend on each other or to other people in society. Otherwise, there would be no society. We depend on the bus driver, the policeman, the baker, the shell diver, the carpenter, the farmer, the plumber, the guy that delivers our food or our groceries, our teachers, our street vendors, our street sweepers, etc., etc. There's nothing wrong with depending to other people. There's nothing wrong with it until we also decide to depend our happiness to other people as well. We can depend almost anything in this world except our happiness. So, what does this passage tell us? It tells us that society, in order for it to function well, each and every of its citizens has a role specific to each other. What this passage tells us is that it is okay to depend on other people. Society, in order for it to work, each and every person has a role, a responsibility, and a duty to be able to do for that society to function well. If there is no society, if you're just living in small groups, then there's only going to be a very few things that you'll be able to accomplish. If you're going to live just by yourself, then there's only going to be a very few things that you can accomplish and get. You gotta be specialized into just one thing, and you're going to have to live in that specific one thing until you die. If you watch a little bit of TV and you watch how tribes work, you will know that most of them has a staple way of how they're going to eat. Most of them has just this one way of eating. Most of them had just this one way on how they're going to get their food, whether they are hunter-gatherers, whether they are farmers, whether they're great divers, maybe they're great in traps, maybe they have cows, maybe they drink milk or blood from cows and cattle, maybe they have some kind of livestock going on, maybe they have a fishery, maybe they're good at fishing. If you try and replicate that today, that's just how it's going to work. But nowadays, the human standard is more than that. The human standard is more than just basic food and shelter. Human standard creates what we call a way of living that is pleasurable, a way of living and a way of life that has a higher standard. We're not just talking about shelter. We're talking about mansions, high-rise apartments. We're not just talking about food. We're talking about mouth-watering fast food, buffets, and 5-star restaurants. There's electricity, air conditioning, heating systems, the internet, computers, gadgets, video games. So you need to travel, you need airplanes, you need cars. In order to have cars, you need someone to build them. In order to drive a car, you need roads. And with roads, you need someone to build roads. You need someone to fund roads. You need someone to have the capacity to be able to build something that long, that massive, and that expensive. Where are you going to get the materials for the roads? Where are you going to get the asphalt from? Where are you going to get the concrete from? Who's going to mix them? All of these things are functioning because each and every one of us has a role in society. So probably think about that for a second and really realize how much we depend on each other, how much each and every one of us is able to function this way because of other people. And some people get ahead of themselves and they think that they can just do well without other people. But once they realize this fact that so much things has to happen in order for them to live the kind of life that they're living right now. There's so many people involved, so many systems involved, and so many things that are working that are unconscious to them. All right, so Yeah, I took a little bit of a break because it's too noisy, and I'm just moving right now, trying to look for another location. But yeah, from what I'm saying is that there's so much things that has to happen in society in order for it to happen and in order for it to function well. This is also something that's a lot different. Not only was I standing earlier, I'm also now walking. So this is now a walking podcast. So again, if you're just listening to this and you don't know what's happening visually, I'm now walking. So yeah, I'm a little bit out of breath, but let me try to regroup and catch my breath here and really think. Let me try and recenter and regroup on what it is that I'm going to say. So what I was saying is that passage talks about how there's a lot of things that has to happen in society in order for it to function well. It also tells us that there's nothing wrong with depending on other people because as we know and as I discussed earlier, there's a lot of things that has to happen in order for us to live this kind of a lifestyle. And so, there's nothing wrong with depending on other people except for one thing. There's this one line in that whole passage that really sums it up, that really brings home what it's really trying to say to us. In society, in order for it to function well, we should depend on other people except for one thing. And that one thing is our happiness. Now, this could be you or this could not be you. Are you someone who based their happiness on other people? Are you someone who based their moods, their actions, their emotions based on what other people do or what other people say or what other people think? It says that we can depend everything in this world on other people except our own happiness. Your happiness should depend only on yourself. Happiness should be something personal and it's only about you. It's not about what's happening on the outside, it's what's happening on the inside. Now, for the most extremes, just like with what I said with the previous podcast about anger and with every other emotions out there, with the very extremes, then of course, there's going to be some sort of provocation. But for the baseline, for the general things, if we're just talking about things in general, it should be something that is inherent inside of you. It should be something that you already have. And so when we're talking about these things, when we're talking about those kinds of things, we're going to be talking about how it doesn't matter how people around you react. It doesn't matter how people around you judge you or think about you. Happiness should be something that is inside of you. Happiness is something that should be personal, and happiness should be something that only you can give yourself and not other people. And I guess as a final note, what I'd also like to say about happiness is that know that happiness comes and goes. It ebbs and flows. It doesn't stay. It is not permanent, just like with other emotions out there. And so do not chase happiness. Do not try to get it from other people. Do not try to get it from some kind of action. Do not try to get it from some kind of a goal. Do not try to get it through some kind of accomplishment because, yes, probably you will get it, and that's okay. But the problem comes from not getting happiness. Getting happiness is not the problem. Getting happiness is so good. It feels good. But the problem comes from not wanting to let go of happiness, of clinging to it, even though you know that it's ephemeral in nature, even though you know that it will not last. Clinging is the problem. Clinging to happiness, even though you know it is temporary, is the problem. If you try so hard to become so happy when you should be feeling sad, that's where the problem comes from. If you ever seen the movie Inside Out, that is exactly what that movie is trying to tell us. Do not cling to happiness. Do not try to be happy when it's time to be sad. Do not try to be happy when it's time to be angry. Happiness feels good and it has its own place, but it shouldn't be something that should be constant. My line for this one is that happy people are not happy all the time. Even the happiest person that you know will someday be sad, and it sometimes is sad. Even the most happy person that you know is not going to be happy all the time. Eventually, there will be a time in their life where they have to be sad. Eventually, there will be a time in their life where they're going to feel sad. Happiness is something that comes and goes. If it comes into your life, appreciate it. Be grateful about it. Be happy about it. And when the time comes and it eventually goes away, it's okay. That's life. So let me just try and give you a summary from what we've just talked about today. talk about how in life there's nothing wrong with depending on other people except our own happiness. And the next thing is that when it comes to our happiness, the problem doesn't come from pursuing happiness. The problem doesn't come from actually feeling happy. There's nothing wrong with feeling happy. Don't be guilty when you are happy. The problem comes from not wanting anything else but happy. The problem comes from clinging to happiness. So, yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. Again, this episode number 8 is so wild. There's a lot of things that happen. It made me run. It made me walk. It made me stand. There's a lot of things that's happening. And now we kind of got to have like a podcast and also a vlog going on at the same time. So if you became dizzy as a result of watching this, I'm really sorry for that. But, we'll try to mix things up here in the Clarity Project podcast. And yeah, these things happen. I don't have full control in them, but the show must go on. That being said, if you watch this in snippets or if you watch it in full, I like to be able to thank you, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you and goodbye.